Hello! Today in this tutorial for Getting Stitchy, I'm going to show you how to make a very simple practice free motion sandwich. And when I refer to that, I mean this. Welcome to Getting Stitchy. I have a sandwich here that I just made up because I'm going to make up some more designs. And just to show you an example, and I've been using these in filming my shorts. This is an example of what I'm doing here. And see, I'm testing out these different designs, and then when I like things well enough, I go ahead and I film it and I make up those shorts that I have a lot of on my channel that I really feature. This is very, very simple. So in this case, I'm still going to have these Kona strips, and I'm going to have these batik strips. So this is a great thing if you have like extra strips lying around, or maybe you have a jelly roll pack where you just weren't really feeling it. You weren't really quite sure why you bought it. Maybe somebody gifted it to you and it's just really not your style. So this is a good use for that, and this way you can practice your design work and getting your designs to look the way that you want them to. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with these two right here because they will look, I think, pretty nice versus the solids that I'm going to use for this. So this right here, this was a jelly pack that I got at the annual Sew Expo that they do in Puyallup. I got this a few years ago, and ordinarily these things with the 40 strips are about $40 to $50, and I got this for $30. And not really knowing what I was going to do with it. The colors are really, you know, there's like a lot of cool colors, but then there's a lot of warm colors, and so it's a little jarring, I think, trying to put this together into something. But I think this is great for these little projects where I want to do some practice with the free motion. I've also used this for testing out tools. It works really well that way. This is a bin where I keep a lot of my jelly roll strips. I have most of my Kona jelly roll strips here. I'm not going to go with any of these bright colors because I have that, and instead I'm going to just go with like the cream color or beige color type stuff. I am thinking, like, that looks pretty good. I could use this. It's kind of nice to be able to use more of like a darker beige like that, so I think I'm going to put that in there, and then I think I will go ahead and use one of these, and then that gets me done with that. You might be asking, why am I deliberately making up my quilt sandwich to be this way? Isn't it easier to just take a couple of pieces of scrap fabric and put some batting in between? Like, you know, this one is an example of that, where I really just have this one piece of fabric and then I put a little batting in between. I just rolled it around it and I just tested some stuff. Now this is great if you want to do testing of the tension, or if you're maybe wanting something that's not going to be a linear design. However, a lot of times when we're quilting things along borders. And when you're quilting along a border, that's a linear pattern. You want to have the hang of quilting something that is continuing in a straight line. And it's not to say that on the striped type of thing like this that you couldn't practice doing like a larger type of thing, like for example these large pantographs that do an edge-to-edge design on your quilt, because you could. But this in particular is very, very useful for quilting up, for practicing your quilting that's going to be something that would be more like what you would do in the borders. And a lot of times for a quilt border, you might have like, you know, 3 different things like this, you know, 3 different strips like this going around each side of the quilt, and you want to fill that up with something interesting potentially if you're doing your own quilting and you're not just farming this out to a long arm quilter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch these up together. So my next step is going to be to go over to the sewing machine. Okay, so I'm going to start stitching up these pieces together, and I want to be able to figure out if there's actually a better side. It looks like this is the better side to the batik, so I'm going to pair it up that way, and I'm just kind of looking. So it looks like I can just stagger this just a little bit off of there. So that is what I will do. And I'm just stitching this at 1/4 of an inch. I also have this set at 2 for my stitch length. So next strip here, and that looks like the better side, the prettier side. Nice thing about the Kona strips, it doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm getting this stitched up really fast. And now that I have stitched up these two, it's a matter of finger pressing these aside. I'll just trim off that little piece on the end there. And by finger pressing, all that is you just take the two pieces, you open up the two pieces that you just stitched together, and then you just kind of gently have it aside with your finger in one hand and the other finger in the other hand. You just do that. And you can do that with the nail of your finger. You could do it with more of the pad of your finger. You know, my nails are pretty short, so it's kind of a combination of both for me right now, which is fine. Or, you know, you could do something where, you know, you took like a hard tool of some kind. That would work too, but I find that the finger is just fine. And it's pretty fast. And this way I don't have to go all the way over to my ironing setup, because in my case, with my small area, I'm actually doing stuff a few feet away in the case of my sewing. Some people have an ironing station right next to their machine, but I do not. So I got one done. I'm going to put that aside. And then need to clip that off of the machine here. Okay. And then we're going to do the same thing. So this, we iron that towards the dark. We pressed it towards the dark, actually, not ironing. And I'm just taking that with the finger. So here we go. Alright, so we're pretty good that way. So next, we want to stitch these big long sections together. I'm going to line that up. You don't have to be super duper accurate about this, because it's not like we're making up patchwork for a particular quilt top. We're just doing this for the purposes of making a practice sandwich. Get those stitching. And what I'm doing here is, because I have that folded that way, this folded this way, I'm just joining that together down below, and that'll just make it to where it's more of a consistent thickness on both this solid piece here and this wine-colored piece. So I just do that up kind of close to the edge so I get the maximum amount of being able to travel this through the machine. Just like that. Okay, so we have that. Then we can just take this and I will just simply do that up. So in this case I'm doing it towards the light. You can go ahead and do things towards the dark if you want, and I would say in the case of doing a patchwork, unless there's some kind of reason of further along in the block that it makes it easier to line things up within a more complex block or with other blocks. The general rule is that you would want to go ahead and have your stuff that way. And we ended up with a pretty big chunk here on the end that was left over, which is fine. So, because it was pretty straight that way. Alright, so next to the ironing. Now I'm at the ironing area that I have across from where I sew. And I'm just laying that out, and I have my iron heated up. And the thing about jelly rolls is they cut them widthwise on the fabric. This area where there's the fold, that would represent the way that a fabric is folded on a bolt, and then you wrap it around the bolt. So that's width of fabric, and width of fabric does have a slight amount of bias. So if you're making some kind of a strip set so that you can cut with a ruler or something, you probably want to be a little bit more careful about how you kind of hold on to these strips and also how you iron them, and especially if you are using prints, because in the case of prints, which these are not actually prints, they're batiks. In the case of prints, they tend to have a bit more of a bias to them, I find. Whereas batiks, it's a tighter weave, so they actually don't have as much bias. So it affords me a certain amount of being able to just kind of manhandle this. But if I was doing that, then I would want to have a lot of care in trying to make sure that I did not distort these a bunch, so that when I would be laying them out to line them up with a particular kind of a ruler, then everything would be actually pretty nice. So we're just going through and quickly cutting these up, and I can still see there's a little bit of a line there. I'm just going to take a little bit of water, and this way I can get that really relaxed on the creases that were actually at the fold point of the fabrics that they took off the bolt to cut when they made these strips. And by the way, you don't have to use jelly roll strips. Maybe you don't have any jelly roll strips on hand that you're willing to part with. And in that case, it's very simple. You just take a yardage cut that you have, and you cut that on the width of fabric at 2.5 inches. At 2.5 inches in your width for your strip there, and that will effectively get you your piece that you can work this way. Or you can, if you have fat quarters, then you take the longest side of that fat quarter and you cut 2.5 inch wide strips off of that, and that would also achieve the same thing. Because what I am doing next is I am taking this, I'm putting it roughly in half here. So I'm taking this, it's roughly in half. And then, I don't really care about this being super clean, because like I said, it's just a practice sandwich. I'm just cutting this with some fabric scissors, and I'm cutting that in half. And then I will stitch these together at the machine. Okay, I'm back at the machine. I am getting myself ready to stitch these. So right now, I'm just lining this up, just like I did when I put the two strips together that were the longer strips to make that 4-stripe long piece. And there we go. we have this piece stitched up. Next, I'm going to be ironing this open. Alright, now that I'm back at the table here, I'm just going to iron these open, spreading that apart here. Actually, I'm going to set the seam first with the iron. There we go. And then, just going to see a little bit of something here on the edge. I want to get that relaxed out, get that little crease relaxed out. Okay. Okay. Very good. Our next step in this caper for making up a quick sandwich is to actually get our sandwich made up here. This right here is fleece. It's actually a good idea for you to use whatever batting is the batting that you're going to use on your project. In my case, this is not actually practicing stitches for a particular project. This is practicing stitches just to practice stitches. This fleece is something that I can acquire pretty cheaply. It's got a thickness that's pretty conducive and similar to a batting. It ends up being a bit too short, because these are generally about 54 inches, for it to be particularly useful. The reason why I use 4 jelly roll strips is because when I stitch them up that way, so I have them turn into 8 stripes, they actually end up becoming almost exactly the same as a fat quarter. So this is a great use for fat quarters. If you've got a fat quarter that you just don't know what to do with, use it on a practice sandwich like this. Now this is a batik fat quarter from Joann's, and the Joann's batiks are not as nice as the batiks that you get from a quilting store, but from time to time they have these deals on the fat quarters, and so this was something where I think I got these fat quarters for about 50 cents a pop. That's a great deal. I could not pass that up. Another nice thing about the fleece in the case of what I'm doing in particular here is that it will grip this fabric pretty well for the preliminary stage of trying to get this thing sandwiched up. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut that. Actually, I think I will use my rotary cutter for that since I've got it out here on the cutting mat. Because I have a pretty sharp blade on there. I recently changed that. This remnant is not quite a quarter of a yard. I might just make that into something that's more of like a whole cloth type of thing later. So I have that, and then I take this and I put this against it, and as you could see, that actually works really well. This little 8-stripe piece is almost exactly a quarter of a yard. So it's actually a little bit smaller, which is ideally what you'd want anyway on your quilt sandwich, because you always want your backing and your batting to be a bit bigger. So I'm just lining that up. Okay. I'm just lining that up, and that's real nice and flat. And then I am going to show you another thing that I've started doing that is much faster than the alternatives available, and it's very effective, especially if you do it on a final quilt top piece that you're working on. It will wash out completely. And what that is the way that I'm going to mark this to make it so that this is easy to work with. Right here we have this out at roughly 21 inches, so I will want basically about 10.5 inches in. I just so happen to have a 10.5 inch ruler, so I can kind of roughly gauge that, and I'll just see. I do have like a little bit of a warp with my pieces, and it's not really going to affect how good this is going to be for practicing, because it's still good for practicing. So I've got that preliminary line there, and what I'd use is I just take a butter knife. This is the serrated edge you'd cut with, so we're not going to use that. We're just going to use the back of it. And that's good, and it gives me a line that I can use. And then I take my long ruler. This is a 6-inch by 24-inch ruler. I just line that up with where I did that, and then I just drag that down, and then Should have just kept that there. And then I will, since it's 6 inches, I'll just do that all the way up the other side, like that. And this is so much faster than marking this with a pen. And you don't have the possibility of something that doesn't wash out. Some people have they might have like a boning tool from paper crafting. That could be something that you could use. But really, just a simple butter knife and you're good to go. Be it. Still gives a nice little track to work with. And if you do mess up your measuring, you can always iron that out and try again. But it looks pretty good. I have a pretty good track that I can work with, and it looks like I can squeeze in one more track on this side, because it should be roughly 1/2 inch or so hanging off those edges. It's extra because it was 21 inches. And so that's what that looks like. And it looks like, from what I see here on the screen, you can see a little bit of the creases that I made with that. So I just ran out of my pens because they're in other projects. That's okay. This is enough to secure this. This is something that I started doing about a month ago as a way for me to create my sandwiches so that I could make little designs and have something to practice, but also something to film for those shorts. And so this is definitely going to work really, really well for anybody that wants to be able to practice particular free motion designs and patterns that they want to fit on a border, or if you're practicing fitting into small spaces, like say you have a rail fence. Those are usually small spaces, and you could practice doing that before you take it to your real piece. I hope this tutorial has been helpful to you. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe. It really makes it a lot easier for me to be able to bring you quality content like this in the future. Thanks again.